Chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.
I was headed toward the airport to catch a flight, driving down a country road that my GPS claimed would serve as a shortcut when my luck officially ran out. A sudden flat tire caused me to swerve off the road, slamming my rental car into the side of a tree. The airbags promptly deployed and made me fall, unconscious. By the time I woke, I realized I had missed my flight, and his cell phone service was shit, preventing me from being able to contact the airlines and make an adjustment. So there I was, miles from where I was supposed to be, without even a spare or a phone to call for. And there wasn't another vehicle to be seen on that dark highway. I was alone, and with no option but to walk. So that's what I decided to do. My head still felt numb from the impact, and my body was hurting, so I wasn't sure I could make it far. But I was sure I had just passed by a crossroads that marked a small rest stop of some sort, so I aimed for that direction. After about 10 minutes of walking, I saw the sign and realized it was actually a mile marker for a township in the area. A place called St. Leopoldi. It didn't sound familiar, but I figured my best option would be to head in that direction before I lost consciousness. The night seemed darker on this highway, and I felt tired, resting on the side of the road near a ditch as I felt the temperature begin to drop. The weather report had claimed the evening would be pleasant, but to be honest, so far, it felt like one long headache. And before I knew what was happening, though, it became a nightmare. I heard this strange bellow coming from the nearby ditch, and it made my hair stand up on end. It sounded like a mixture between a cat and a wolf, and maybe an owl. I stood up and looked toward the gully, trying to see if there was a wild animal somewhere nearby. The whole area seemed still and deserted, almost devoid of life. As I stood there, a chill filled the air, and I heard the noise again. This time, I used my smartphone to peer into the ditch and get a better look. There was definitely something there. Some small creature that was crawling along in the mud. But it didn't look like any beast I was familiar with. As I shone the light on it, it turned its head toward me and I nearly dropped my phone. Its eyes, they looked human. In that unexpected moment, I scrambled away and moved toward the road, uncertain I was safe there anymore. Whatever this thing was, I resolved to steer clear of the side roads for the rest of the journey. But each few feet I moved, I swore I heard the creature follow, making its ominous, guttural noises as it crawled along. I felt its eyes were on me as I started to run down the street, desperate to get away from the unnerving thing. I wasn't sure if it was a demented individual or some kind of monster, but the thing moved at inhuman speed, even as I spotted a farmhouse on the side of the road and started to dash toward it. Someone inside could surely help. I rushed to the doors, trying to make as much noise as I could, but the occupants must have been out for the night because nothing I did was stirring them.
Anybody home?
Quickly, I decided to hide in the barn instead, hunkering down and watching as the shaggy creature approached. I could feel my entire body shivering as I caught a better glimpse of it. This hunched-over form sneaking into the shed and watching as it crawled toward one of the cows. Before I knew what was happening, the creature attacked it, grabbing a hold of the bovine and tackling it to the ground. The large animal tried its best to fight, but before long the diminutive monster had somehow managed to turn it over entirely with its legs up, and the confused farm animal moaning as I listened to the strange little creature begin to feast. It sounded like it was killing the cow, but I dared not move for fear I would be next. The crunching and grinding of the creature kept going for at least an hour as I hunkered down. Finally, satisfied and full of meat and milk, the shaggy, short cryptid crawled away, leaving me to hide in the hay bales. Truth be told, I was so terrified by what had happened to the cow I wasn't sure I felt safe to go anywhere, and I was also too exhausted, so I tried my best to go rest in the smelly barn. It was better than whatever nightmares awaited me in the snow beyond. Somehow, I managed to fall asleep, perhaps from the shock and the terror I had experienced, but in the morning, my dilemma only worsened. I felt something nudge me on my backside and groggily awoke sometime after sunrise, staring up to see a dark-haired farmhand holding a sawed-off shotgun in my face.
Whoa, don't shoot, don't shoot.
Instinctively, I raised my hands in defense, showing the worker I meant no harm, and they ordered me on my feet with a few harsh words I couldn't make out.
Easy.
It didn't sound like a language I was familiar with. Then, they pointed their weapon toward the farmhouse, saying a few more strange things that I couldn't understand. But I got the impression they wanted me to head inside. I obeyed immediately, my body too sore and tired from the night before to argue. Hopefully, whatever creatures were lurking about would not still be here in the daylight, I thought to myself. As I crossed the yard toward the house, the unease I felt began to go away when I heard children laughing and saw normal people on the front porch. Well, I say normal, but truth be told, I could immediately gather that these folks were quaint, perhaps similar to Amish or Quakers in their quiet lifestyle. The children dispersed when they saw me, and the housewife went to go get her husband. I stood awkwardly there in the front yard for what felt like eternity, until they both returned. He was a well-dressed man in overalls with a brim hat and a long, scraggly beard, in typical attire for the two faiths I assumed he identified with, but I didn't want to jump to any conclusions until I had the full story.
"You lost, son?"
he asked me. Before I even had a chance to respond, he raised his hand for me to come inside and offered.
"The wife just finished making us porridge for breakfast. Come sit a spell and tell us how you came to our little town."
As I ate the warm food, I recounted my tale to the couple, although I left out the parts where I had seen the strange creature that had attacked their cattle. I didn't want to seem insane, and I wasn't sure if the experience I'd had was actually even real. They sat and listened quietly, the husband running his fingers through his beard thoughtfully as I concluded the story.
"You're lucky that you found us. Winter comes quick around these parts, and it's harsh and cold. Any day now, the ground will be covered with snow, and travel will be impossible. But you can stay with us as long as you like. We have plenty of room, and it wouldn't be very neighborly of us to send you away,"
he declared. The wife was nodding and bobbing her head in agreement as I checked my phone. Of course, there was no reception way out here. I shouldn't have been surprised. For all I knew, because of missing my flight, I had likely wound up losing that job. So, a vacation in the sticks wasn't exactly on the agenda, but I figured it was better than drowning my sorrows in liquor back home. As we finished the meal, The couple instructed me to leave my bowl on the floor of the breakfast room, which I found a bit odd, but I did as they told me to before I was shown the guest room. The wife rattled off a few rules, such as no food in the bed and no candles burning at night. I figured they were just customs that related to tradition of their faith, so I told her I would try my best to remember. As I settled in, I looked out the window and saw, just as they predicted, winter clouds forming over their farmland fast. Soon it began to snow ever so gently, and I saw the two of them out in the front yard, apparently having an argument. As I watched, the husband and wife became more heated with one another until, at last, he announced he was going to town for a drink after smacking her across the face. Somehow, despite the obvious patriarchal system I had seen so far, the act surprised me. This picture-perfect little slice of heaven seemed to have cracks after all, I thought. I also was certain I saw another shadowy, shaggy monster dragging a lamb off into the nearby woods. The poor, tiny animal bleeding as the wife watched it happen, impassively. Her face told me I wasn't simply seeing things. Whatever this strange troll was, it was real. I kept myself as busy as I could the remainder of the day, offering to help with chores and do anything that would keep my mind off of the strange things happening around the area. But as the day lingered on, I saw more evidence something terrible and unnatural was occurring in this small town. I was helping put the dishes away for the midday meal when I grabbed a plate with some leftover chicken to throw it away, and the wife stopped me short.
"You mustn't bother it,"
she whispered. Her eyes were filled with fear as I lingered near the trash can. I hadn't spoken about the creatures to her yet, and I could tell that she wasn't likely to tell me much, but still, I felt the need to get answers. There is something living in these woods. I've seen it, I said, as I placed the plate back down. Her eyes twitched, and she looked away.
"I must prepare for Jonah to return home. Much work to be done,"
she answered as she flitted away to another room. Outside, I saw the snow was falling more rapidly now, covering up the roads, but I could see strange footprints out there, moving about the farmland. Evidence of the creature that seemed to be using this area to their heart's content, unhindered by any person. I saw one of them enter the kitchen soon after this thought crossed my mind. It moved like lightning to the leftovers the farm wife had given out. It chomped and licked at the pan, its wild eyes glaring up at me, daring me to stop them. I could see from their snarled and broken teeth that the creature was ravenous for food. It looked like it wanted to rip me limb from limb. I reached for a knife to defend myself, only for the wife to grab my wrist and pull me back into the hallway.
"We mustn't disturb them,"
she whispered, repeating the instructions as I saw something long and skinny crawl from one of the cabinets. This one looked even more malnourished than the other, its lanky form hardly able to pull its body across the floor. The other creature began to snarl, protecting the leftovers as best as it could. And I watched in disbelief as the two monsters fought, biting and snapping at one another, ripping the flesh off of their scrawny bodies. Perhaps what was more frightening about them was how much like children they looked. Naked and starving children that had turned animalistic. The wife kept me still until they had left into the cold, and I dropped the knife, my heart beating wildly. "What in the hell are those things?" I shouted to her, but she was too petrified in fear to say a word and insisted we wait for her husband to return. When Jonah made it back to the house that night, the dark clouds covered the sky, but the ground was illuminated by the snowfall. We heard the other trolls moving about in the land, attacking animals and neighbors just the same, up until he made it into the house. As we ate just a little bit of porridge and yogurt, the rest of their food pantry was barren and dry. I felt the need to break the ice on the conversation. "How long have you been dealing with these demons?" I asked. My stomach was growling for lack of food, and I knew why. This entire town was living in fear of those creatures, letting them run amok. The husband drew in his breath and put his bowl on the ground. Just as I had finished talking, we heard loud roars against the doors, slamming and opening them over and over again, making everyone on edge as I saw several of the trolls crawl into the kitchen to steal what little food we had left. As the demons took our dinner away, the husband explained the situation as best he could.
They come when the snow hits the ground. There are at least a dozen of them. Some speculate perhaps there are more out there in the woods, but they take what they want. And in exchange, let us live,
he whispered solemnly, even as one of the ghastly creatures licked pudding and yogurt right off his beard. He did his best not to flinch.
We protect our young ones by abiding by their rules. Keep others from being attacked or punished by their cruelty,
he added as the banging came to a stop and the creatures fled out the door again. But your children starve. Your town does. I can tell just from your wife and your children that they need to have food and they won't make it through the winter, I argued. He pursed his lips, obviously not wanting to reveal another nasty detail of the story, but I wasn't having it. This madness had to stop. Who is in charge of this village? We should round up all the men and find these things and kill them, I told them both.
and risk their wrath? Possibly kill even more innocent lives? You are an outsider. Do not attempt to dictate how we live.
Jonah snapped back as he slammed his fist on the table. The whole kitchen got quiet as he cleared his throat and added,
The snow has become heavy this year, and therefore our sacrifices will be greater. The elders of our village have chosen to throw a festival to the spirits of the earth which watch over us tomorrow. And once we finish this ritual, the demons will leave us alone.
I saw the wife's face get pale as something unspoken was left out of the conversation, but I decided not to press the matter any further. I was sure the rest of this small village would likely follow the same strange rituals as these folk, and I was considering simply leaving. That opportunity never came, though. During the night, the little creatures came back, this time more numerous than ever, clattering against doors and snarling against the windows. The children cried themselves to sleep, and I could hardly close my eyes for fear of them simply entering the house and doing whatever they pleased with me. I kept a knife that I had hidden away under my pillow that night as the monsters roamed freely, determined to escape the nightmare the next day. But I was so exhausted from the ordeal, I don't recall much about the morning, except Jonah rising and telling the children to dress as though they were attending a Sunday sermon.
You will be joining us as well. It will be safer than remaining here,
the wife explained. I saw genuine concern for my well-being in her eyes, so I decided not to question. I was actually a bit curious to see what sort of ritual the townfolk might perform that would appease these creatures. So I followed them down the snow-covered roads toward the main marketplace. The rest of St. Leopoldi was just as quaint and simple as I had expected, a testimonial to their refusal to connect to the modern world. I wondered as we got close to the town square if this was because of the creatures or something else. I saw villagers in their homes and businesses peeking out, all dressed in their Sunday best, or some kind of colorful costume that reminded me of Santa's elves. As we approached the center of town, I soon realized why they all seemed to be shaking in their boots. There was a massive stone statue there of a giantess, carved in the finest rock this side of the main coast, and surrounding her I saw artistic representations of the 12 demonic children I had seen over the course of the last few nights. The entire square had been shoveled free of snow for a platform to be built around the statue, along with long tall torches and metallic iron cages that lined the corners of the square. In 3 of those cages, I saw people, naked and shaking from the cold of the elements, screaming to be let loose, even as the leaders of this small village calmed the crowd.
Brother Jonah, have you brought our final sacrifice? The fruit of the country?
One man asked.
I have, my lord. He stands before you now,
Jonah responded. Then I suddenly realized my role in this festival. I was not invited as a guest. These people were about to sacrifice me to this massive stone edifice. As soon as the realization hit me, I tried to run, but Jonah pushed me down to the gravel and shoved his boot into my chest.
It's better if you don't fight it, stranger. Your presence here was a blessing from our giants. To prevent my family from losing anyone, the Lord of the Snow gave us you,
he explained. Several burly men tied me with ropes and placed me in a cage to the right as the elders continued to make a speech, passing out bowls and other utensils to the crowd.
Brothers, sisters, our harvest is drawn to a close. The shadow of snowfall is overcast, and the spirits of the earth must be appeased. Let us pray now to them that our township remains under their watchful eyes. Let us ask them for forgiveness for walking on their land.
The entire crowd began to chant and moan and bow before the statues as several men lit the cages on fire starting to my left. I desperately looked toward the husband and wife for some kind of help, knowing I would soon be engulfed if they didn't act.
Great Grilla, Lady of the Hills and Devourer of Flesh, wife to our sleeping saint and mother to the 13 demons, come forth and feast upon these sinful children of men. Let their flesh atone for our year of waste. Our forgiveness be upon their deaths.
I heard something shake and rumble and saw that the stone statue seemed to be moving on its own, suddenly taking life as the entire town shrieked and trembled. The giantess grumbled and reached down, crushing the first cage with her strong hand as she snarled loudly. Her children came to life next, snickering and snarling into the crowd as they attacked random townspeople. The elder chanted that they would be allowed to feast on any that they pleased. I knew I was to be the next meal for this cult of mad followers, and I begged the family that had let me stay with them for help. but they were so aghast with the ceremony they paid me no heed. I crouched down as the giantess crushed the top of the cage, giving me mere seconds to run. I leapt from the trap and raced across the snow, the older men of the town shouting to hunt me down. I did not stop for anything, bolting from the town and towards the woods, hiding in the tall grass as the demonic children continued to attack all the villagers that they pleased. I could not stop to reflect on this hellish nightmare as I gathered my strength and kept running into the night until my power failed me. When I woke, I was on the road again, covered in blood and mud and snow. A passing car asking if I needed aid. I saw I had made it all the way back to the crossroads, and I thanked them for help, barely able to crawl into the back seat. As I got my rest, I asked them where they were headed, hardly even considering their response important at first.
Where are we going?
The driver checked his GPS, the instrument glitching as he admitted,
I'm a bit lost. I was considering going toward the township for some help.
I grabbed the back of the car seat, my wide and frantic eyes pleading that he didn't.
No, you mustn't go there. Just keep driving, even if it's all night. Stay away from that dreadful town.
As he turned around the vehicle to go the other way, I heard the howling of a cat off in the woods and shivered in panic. Snow was coming down harder than ever as we left. Now, I could only hope that we made it far away from this madness before another nightmare took shape.
Valentine's Advent Candleator. Burn one a day till Valentine's Day. Discover what it truly means. Don't peek ahead at future labels. Savor all if you are able. The Thonic Candle Company. So read the note enclosed with 31 tiny candles sent in a massive box with no logo. The creators of my candleator preferred to be discreet, but this discreet? People have been raving about Thonic's scented candle collections for 5 years now. The company offered themed sets for Halloween and Christmas/Hanukkah/Kwanzaa/Solstice, and also New Year, Valentine's Day, Easter, Mother's and Father's Day, even the 4th of July. You had to know where to look, though. Thonic had no website or Facebook page, nor did it post images of its products on Instagram or other picture-based social media. Word of mouth and threads on obscure forums for die-hard candle lovers were the only ways to get them. Price was also an obstacle. The smallest set ran north of $200. 4th of July had 3 candles, red, white, and blue, to burn on the 4th, 5th, and 6th of that month. Still, 2 C notes. For the Valentine's Day Advent Candleator, I'd forked over $1,000. $1,000 for treasures that would vanish as soon as I burned them. Why? Obsessives like me knew the answer. We were hungry. Ravenous. We would not rest until we found the perfect candles, ones whose aromas would creep into our nostrils and noggins, suffusing us with satisfaction. Candles were our windows to the world, for smells lasted far longer in the memory than sights. What smells would this grand collection, rimshot, entice me with as February unfolded? Inside the much larger package were 31 smaller ones, labeled with numbers on the lids. Since the note had warned me to not look ahead of today's date, I opened the box labeled 1. Pumpkin spice. Of course, that fan fave should have been included in a Halloween assortment. I cringed. Go to Bath & Body Works or Yankee Candle, heck, even on Etsy, and you'll know why. As soon as you walk in, or open the artisan's box, as the case may be, you're swamped, engulfed, overpowered by pumpkin and spice in an all-caps miasma. If you're me, you almost faint. I was loath to sniff its fragrance, fearing nausea. I lifted the votive to my nose. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. I stuck the tip of my nose in the votive, suddenly afraid I'd gotten a defective batch. Were all of them odorless? If so, I needed to repackage and return them fast. Burn 1 a day till Valentine's. I paused, remembering the poem. Operative word, burn. I shrugged and headed to the kitchen, candle in hand. 1 flick of a butane lighter later, heaven, paradise, bliss. Whatever word you use to describe such a place or state, pumpkin spice evoked it. I now stood in Grandma's kitchen, my mouth watering over the aroma of her best pie. She made it every All Hallows Eve, as she called October 31st, and brought it to us. Her entry into a shabby nursing home had devastated me. That pie was part of the reason. No longer would she bring a treat sweeter than candy to my house or send it in a care package. Instead, she'd languish in bed, surrounded by worse odors and stale air to entrap them. I sank down at the table, sobbing over buried memories that had resurfaced with a vengeance. My tears threatened to put the candle out, but they sank into the hot wax instead. I didn't care. I bawled my eyes out. At this rate, I'd never make it to the end of the month. When I finally wiped my eyes and blew my nose, so hard that Dumbo would think I was his bestie, I was surprised to find my treasure spent. Only a film of pumpkin-colored wax remained. Okay, these candles are smaller than I thought. The poem said, savor them all. No kidding. Using 1 more tissue, I composed myself, cleared the votive, and put it in my recycling bag. Fortunately, the next few days and candles brought happy thoughts. Fuji Apple gave me a reminder to pick some up at the store before they ran out. Hot cider toddy, in the same vein, prompted me to make some. I enjoyed campfire and s'mores immensely, even though they were rather summer-oriented, but my favorite was fall leaves. Cartoonist Bill Watterson, creator of Calvin and Hobbes, had a word for how they smelled. Snipped. The Thonic candle, number 7, diffused the essence of this word. Had the company taken actual autumn leaves, pulverized them in a food processor, and molded the slurry into the wax? They must have. How else could they have captured such crisp, earthy, vaguely smoky musk? Inhaling it, I was teleported to the chill of my childhood backyard. With each candle burnt, my hunger grew. Not only because of the food-based scents, mind you. I found it harder and harder to restrain myself from taking a quick peek at future candles. What would be the harm? However, I supposed unboxing them was like watching a TV show in the old days before binge-watching Netflix. You had to tune in next week, or at least the next day. The next week of February heralded the arrival of damp moss, overcast day, toadstools? Were the Chandlers at Thonic playing practical jokes on me after luring me in? Who'd buy these candles, let alone burn them? I would. I'd sniff my $1,000 prize through to the end. Damp moss, self-explanatory, made me a bit queasy, but it didn't seep into every nook and cranny of my house. Overcast day, however, made me want to blow it out and throw it out before it extinguished itself. It smelled like wet air combined with wet dog. As I held my nose shut and prayed it'd burn fast, the taunts of school bullies on a soggy playground haunted me. So did the thought of days getting shorter and darkness coming sooner. Foggy, stinky days. Overcast days, not fit for football or even a brisk walk. Days that made you yearn to hibernate. As for toadstools, it had a fungal pungency, not entirely unpleasant. I kind of liked it. I don't know if it was the candles or my increasingly lethargic state, but I found my mind and senses wandering. Fresh scenes came upon me unbidden as the flame in the votive flared. I found myself in stubbled farm fields, bare forests, silent and deserted streets. Lost in time and place, I wended my way, wondering why I'd been transported to such solitary vistas. Was it part of what this part of autumn meant, coming to terms with the emptiness after the harvest? The last candle for that week was petrichor, filling my home with the perfume of earth after rain. February 14th dawned. I didn't until the sun had reached its zenith at noon. The next 7 selections, as I was soon to discover, I didn't peek, were touchy-feely. Not with touchy-feely names like Sweetheart Soap or Cotton Candy Cuddles, however. Scents appropriate for the time of year. One after another, the darkly hued candles presented themselves as burnt offerings. Angst, despair, lamentation, penitence, rue, sorrow, temptation. I blinked at that last one. Another fluke? My head wanted to think so, but my heart said no such luck. I bought 3 6-packs of tissue boxes, preparing myself for an ordeal I didn't want to face. I would even buy Walmart's version of pumpkin spice, if it would spare me from the doldrums. Still, I soldiered on. I cried. I cried some more. I filled my wastebaskets, living room, bathroom, and kitchen, to brimming. Here came the flashbacks of too many slights in grade school, too many C's in high school, and too many pills in college. Here came the aftertaste of charcoal in my mouth at the hospital. Here came the disappointed sighs of my parents and that of Grandma's last breath. Most of all, here came my failures and mistakes, each one stinging as if I'd made it yesterday. Scents became salves. Sandalwood, cinnabar, blackcurrant, and rose helped me heal. At the end of 6 days, they'd found their ways into my pores, and I gladly scrubbed my sins away. Last came temptation. Why pile more of them on? It didn't look shiny or sparkly. Nothing on the outside made me want to smell what lay beneath. What drew me to this candle was its aura, if that makes sense, and if I'd imbued it with such. I lit it as one part experiment, one part getting my money's worth, and one part I didn't yet fathom. I detected hints of jasmine mixed with salt and cream. My body twitched, guessing their nature. A bridal bouquet after the wedding's over. No sleep for this eternal virgin tonight. Once exhaustion overcame me, a flash of mental sound, a clap of thunder without storms, thrashing in my sheets, sweat on my neck and other places, swirling red-black streams. Should I continue? Whether I liked it or not, I should have no part of it anymore. 7 more candles, now that temptation had been yielded to. 7 that terrified me. Hair, tears, flesh, blood, guts, bones, marrow. Layer after layer of the candle wax and myself stripped away as the flame consumed them. Hair radiated no ghastly stench, but a whiff of my own oily locks if I hadn't showered. Tears? I'd expended enough of those as of late, and drowned myself in the wax's salty ocean essence. The next 3 made me so hungry for red meat that I chowed down on all I could buy, making 4 grocery runs in 7 days. At 3 a.m., steak sandwiches had tremendous appeal. So did scraping my teeth over my own arms, as a matter of fact. I actually gagged myself with a cloth as the next 2 burned down, afraid to gnaw and afraid to know. The efflux of iron saturated me. By February 20th, I was ready to check myself into a nursing home, shabby or not. The next 2 were exactly what I expected, and not at all. Pine and velvet. Pine to house my lifeless form, and dusty velvet, or velveteen more likely, to cushion it. Halloween, cold as steel, a harbinger of winter. Those trick-or-treaters had better bundle up. I dared not burn the last candle or even open the box labeled 31 until evening. Better 11:11 p.m. I took the votive and my butane lighter upstairs, leaning on the banister with every step, wishing I'd fall. That would end it, end me, and the madness that ate away at my senses. I undressed in considerable pain, not so much taking my clothes off as peeling them off, like strips of... My bones creaked as I squirmed my way into bed, inch by inch. When I lay down, I lit the candle. Printed in capital letters, hand-inked in an old English font, was a single word: void. Lamp off, covers up to my chin, eyes closed, mind stilled. Lighted cylinders of wax emitted heat. Void emitted cold, utter cold, Kelvin scale glaciation. Not of the grave, but of space, of the spaces between the stars, where nothing and everything awaited. No aroma reached my chill-lined nostrils, for there was none to be had except void is all sense and none, amplified and nullified, concentrated and canceled all at once. As it enshrouded me, I recalled the second line of the poem that had come with the collection. discover what it truly means. Valentine's Day is void beneath the candy consumption and creepy cards. It means there is nothing to prove and nothing to fear when the spice of life grows dim and finally fades. Death is chthonic, after all.
A woman's voice floated from the speakers overhead.
Dr. Harper, please report to Laboratory 3. Dr. Harper, please report to Laboratory 3.
The word please almost amused him, like they were asking, like he had a choice. Harper slowly sat up on the couch in the doctor's lounge and pulled his gaze from the useless TV, whose only function seemed to be showing no signal on the screen in a baleful blue. The clock on the wall showed 4:15 in the morning. Harper sighed and stood, stretching his back until he felt a series of satisfying pops. He ran his hand over the front pocket of his pants, checking for his cell phone that wasn't there. He grimaced, remembering they had confiscated it before he boarded the plane. His footsteps echoed through the empty corridor. It was early, but he still expected to run across an overworked resident running their rounds, or a custodian taking the opportunity to work in peace. The silence made him afraid, and that's what he hated most of all. Fear could be useful, he thought. It could be a warning, but mostly it was an annoyance. The hall opened up into Methodist Willowbrook Hospital's lobby, where 2 armed guards eyed him as he approached. The fluorescent lights reflected off their shiny black helmets and polished boots. "Identification, please," the one on the left said, holding out his hand. He looked all of 19 years old with a round, soft face. Harper kept walking.
"I'm about to be late. Now, if you don't mind..."
The boy placed his hand on Harper's chest. "ID. Now, please." The boy's partner tensed and the barrel of his rifle rose. Not much, but enough for Harper to notice. Harper stepped back.
"Keep your hands off me. Does your mother know you're out this late, asshole?"
"Stand down, Evans," a voice said from the lobby. A man rose from one of the love seats and approached them. The man's helmet dangled from a clip on his body armor, clicking against a rifle slung across his chest. Where the 2 guards were dressed in black tactical gear, the man was in military fatigues. Army or Marines, Harper guessed, but didn't care either way. The man stepped between the guards. "I'm Staff Sergeant James, NCO in charge of these 2 gentlemen tonight. And you are?" Harper did his best to keep his annoyance from showing on his face.
"I'm Dr. Keith Harper, and I'm late for a very important meeting. I'm expected..."
"Dr. Harper. Keith. Can I call you Keith?" Before Harper could tell James that he could not in fact use his first name, the man had taken hold of his arm and led him a few feet away from the other guards. "Listen, Keith.
We're not friends. You don't get to..."
"As I was saying, Keith, you're on your way to a meeting, right?"
"Yes, I told you..."
"You have a job to do." James gestured to the guards. "These boys have a job to do, too. Their job is to guard this entrance. So, why don't you let them do their job so you can go do yours?" Harper shook with anger, his fists clenched at his sides.
"Look, I've been dragged halfway across the country. I'm exhausted, and I'm in no mood for this. Now, if you will excuse me..."
"I don't."
"What?"
"I don't excuse you."
"You cannot detain me here."
James smiled. "And that is one of the many ways you are wrong, Doctor. I can detain you. See, this is my lobby. No one goes through my lobby without me saying so. Now, show your ID to those nice fellows there, and you can be on your way. It's that easy."
"Fine," Harper
growled.
"You want to act like we're under martial law? Go ahead, but you'll hear about this later."
James's laugh filled the empty lobby. "See, Doc? I told you. So many ways to be wrong. If you'd taken 2 seconds to wonder why Army personnel were in charge of a couple of local SWAT guys, you might have figured it out for yourself. As of midnight, you are under martial law. Harper's mouth had gone dry.
That's impossible.
You want to see something impossible? When you get up to the 3rd floor, take a look out the window. Now, flash your ID to the guards, get the fuck out of my lobby, and have a nice day. Harper reached his shaky hand into his coat pocket and slowly withdrew his ID badge. The guard glanced at it. Thank you, Doctor. You may proceed. Harper's lips twitched, straining to hold back a stinging remark. James's smile was gone. He simply cocked his head to the side, away from the hall. His face burning, Harper brushed past the guards and into the lobby. Within a few strides, he passed a tall bronze statue of Jesus, his hand on a kneeling woman.
A lot of help you were.
He spat at the statue. He reached the elevator and stabbed his finger at the button. The door slid open, and he stepped inside. Harper slammed his fist against the wood paneling.
Who the fuck does he think he is?
He cried.
Stupid fucking pseudo-alpha males and their guns.
Dr. Harper?
The woman's voice said through a speaker above his head, but this time she was a little less pleasant.
Please report to Laboratory 3. Dr. Harper. Please report to
I'm
Laboratory
coming,
3.
goddammit!
He said, punching the button for the 3rd floor. The elevator lurched upward. Harper closed his eyes and tried to slow his breathing, willing himself to calm down. This is why he hated fear, because it turned him into a goddamn mess. He could feel his pulse in his neck and loathed the hammer and thump of it. By the time the doors opened onto the 3rd floor, he had mostly composed himself. He stepped quickly out into the hall, telling himself his fast stride was purposeful and not panicked. Dr. Granger stood outside the stainless steel double doors that led into Lab 3, along with some woman he didn't know. She was probably mid-50s, and her silver hair brushed the shoulders of her navy suit. Harper forced himself to smile as he approached.
I apologize for being late. I had a little run-in with the guards.
Granger cleared his throat, beads of sweat running from the top of his bald head.
Dr. Harper, this is Dr. Ann Schneider, Deputy Director of the CDC. She's flown in from Atlanta to, observe. Dr. Harper, it's a pleasure to meet you,
Schneider said, holding out her hand. Harper shook it.
You as well, Deputy Director. I appreciate you flying in on such short notice, but your expertise may help to understand what's going on here. It might,
Harper said.
If I had any idea what was going on here. I was pulled away from dinner by some general who put me on a plane and said it was a matter of national security. I apologize ahead of time if I seem a little out of sorts. Of course,
Schneider said.
I had a very similar experience myself, and here we are. Remind me, Doctor, what is it you specialize in?
Harper wanted to sigh, but suppressed the urge. Hadn't she just mentioned his expertise?
Cell biology and physiology. Specifically, physiological bone remodeling.
She nodded, but her eyes seemed far away.
That sounds fascinating. Yes, I think so at least,
Harper said.
So, what's this about? I mean, obviously, it's about whatever is going on in Houston, but I don't know what it has to do with me.
Granger pushed open one of the doors.
Please, come in and we can talk about it privately.
Harper followed them in. The lab was split into 2 sections. One side was filled with various monitors beeping at intervals, and 2 rows of mismatched chairs that Harper was fairly sure were dragged in just for this purpose. He walked over to the large window that separated their side of the room from the other and rapped gently on the glass. A mint green curtain obfuscated the view, only showing the smeared shadows of people at work.
What's this lab used for?
He said, turning back to Granger.
Its intended use is to treat patients with highly communicable diseases, but in the past 11 years I've been at this hospital, we've never had to use it, thank God. So whoever is in there is contagious?
Schneider hushed Granger with a look.
The truth is, we don't know,
she said.
At this point, we don't know how it spreads, or even what it is. We just know what happens to the infected.
Harper didn't like the tone of her voice. There was something behind it. Fear? Definitely. But he thought he heard excitement there as well.
And just what is it that happens?
Harper said, not entirely sure he wanted the answer. Granger stepped past him and thumbed the button on a nearby intercom.
This is Dr. Granger. Open the curtain.
One of the shadows moved behind the veil and the curtain was drawn back. A man lay on a bed in the middle of the room. The bright white of the light shone down on his sweaty, jaundiced skin. His chest heaved with every ragged breath he managed to draw in past the heavy leather restraints that secured him to the bed.
This is Matthew Pastor,
Granger said.
He was a few blocks away from Ground Zero. He somehow managed to make it to his truck and drove away from downtown. They stopped him as he tried to ram through a barricade the National Guard had stood up on Highway 45. They didn't know what to do with him, so they brought him here. Wait, Ground Zero?
Harper said.
Last I heard, there was some rioting going on or something. What the hell happened? Terrorists?
Granger and Schneider exchanged a look. On the other side of the glass, the sallow man bucked against his restraints and screamed. Harper felt every hair on the back of his neck stand up.
What is this, Granger? What has he got? Soon,
Schneider said.
I'll tell you what we know, but now we just need you to observe.
Granger keyed the intercom once more.
Make sure the cameras are rolling, then get out of there.
There was a flurry of movement as the masked doctors in the other room did their last-minute checks and gathered their instruments. And in less than a minute, the room was empty save for Matthew Pastor. The doors opened on their side of the glass, and the doctors came spilling into the room, talking fast and grabbing up nearby seats. Granger gently led Harper away from the glass. They both stood against the wall and waited. Pastor screamed again and threw himself against the straps. Harper watched as the man struggled, his veins showing green beneath his yellow skin, his breathing quickening as he began to hyperventilate.
Very soon now,
Granger whispered. The bed shook with Pastor's wild movements, and suddenly there was a snap as loud as a gunshot as one of the leather straps holding Pastor's wrist gave way. He quickly pivoted and dug his fingers beneath the strap on his opposite wrist and pulled, tearing away the restraint and flinging it across the room. Harper grabbed Granger by the arm.
Do something for Christ's sake.
Granger only shook his head weakly.
Nothing we can do now.
Pastor flexed his chest and the strap there snapped like an overstretched rubber band. He sat up and made quick work of the ankle restraints. He rolled from the bed, clutching his head and crying out.
Help me! I got someone help!
His words were cut short as he slammed his head against the floor. Blood fanned out from his split scalp. Pastor raised his head and looked to the window. Harper stood transfixed. Pastor nodded to no one, his face drawn and bloody. He placed both hands flat against the floor, raised his head high and slammed it forward once again. The sound of the man's skull cracking was much louder than Harper would have imagined. He'd cut into skulls for research purposes, yes, but had never witnessed something like this. This was primal. Dazed, Pastor stood on wobbling legs and fell against the window. He rested there, his breath sending patterns of fog across the glass. The wound on his forehead was red, and his cracked skull showed through it, shockingly white. Harper had had enough. He was done watching this man torture himself while everyone stood around and...
There!
Granger said breathlessly.
Look there, Harper!
Harper didn't want to, but he did. The crack in the man's skull began to grow as flakes of bone spread out like a blooming flower. Protrusions and knobs snaked from between the petals, hardening in front of the man's face like malformed horns.
That isn't possible,
Harper said, his eyes dry and unblinking.
That kind of growth isn't possible.
Pastor turned his head towards Harper's voice, his new horns digging furrows into the glass with a screech. The jaundice had spread from the corners of the man's eyes and into the blue irises, staining them a sickly green.
You're right, Dr. Harper,
Schneider said, seeming to appear out of nowhere at his side.
It shouldn't be possible, but it is. And that's where you come in.
Harper shook his head, his thoughts a jumbled mess.
I've got to... If you'll excuse me.
He shouldered past them and shoved the doors open. The air in the hall was blessedly cooler than in the observation room, and he breathed it in greedily. Harper slowly paced the floor, trying not to think about what he had just witnessed, but the crooked points of bone wouldn't leave his mind.
Get it together,
he said, rubbing his hands over his face.
It's science. It's new, but it's all science. You can figure it out. Just have to calm down and...
He trailed off as he looked to the window at the end of the hall, the words of the sergeant downstairs running through his head. You want to see something impossible? When you get up to the 3rd floor, take a look out the window. And that's what Harper did. The early morning sunlight was a serene mixture of orange and pink. It bathed the cars in the lot below and lit up the dew on the leaves of the trees just to the south. It was a beautiful Texas morning, a different kind of sunrise than he was used to in Chicago, where the light had to find its way through the skyscrapers first. Dr. Granger's footsteps clicked towards him, but he barely noticed, just continued to stare. In the distance was a bruise on the horizon, a massive spot of livid purple and diseased green.
What is that?
Harper said as much to himself as Granger.
That,
Granger said,
is downtown Houston. Is it?
Harper began, trying to find words to fit.
Is it radiation? Or clouds? Both? Why is it just hanging there? It's not clouds,
Granger said.
And it's not just hanging there. It's spreading from the ground up, like a bubble or something. Military guys are calling it the scab. Why? Because the uppermost parts of it are hardening, like a crust. Still, no one knows what it is or where it's coming from.
Harper rubbed his temples, then ran his hands through his hair, exhaling loudly.
And what exactly does that thing out there have to do with the young man in the lab growing horns at an alarming rate?
Granger sighed and looked back to the window.
Anyone who's been caught in the scab has come out like poor Matthew Pastor. Strong, angry, and out of control. Hell-bent on causing trauma to himself to break his bones.
Harper interrupted.
That's it, isn't it? The bone must be broken for new growth to occur. It triggers some sort of mutation or... Shit, I don't know, but it feels right. You may be right, Harper, but we just don't have more info to...
The crash of broken glass echoed through the hall, followed by cries and screams. One of the masked doctors ran from the lab, slamming the door behind him.
He's broken containment! Go!
The door buckled in the middle and flew free of its hinges, slamming into the doctor and sending him sprawling to the opposite wall as Matthew Pastor erupted through the doorway. The doctor raised both hands in a warning gesture before Pastor reached between them and grabbed the doctor by the head, covering his face.
Please,
the doctor said, his voice muffled by Pastor's palm.
Please don't!
Pastor squeezed, the muscles of his forearm flexing hard enough to split the yellowing skin. Harper could hear the man's skull cracking, the sound like faraway gunshots. Blood ran from his eyes and soaked into his mask. Harper's shocked stupor was broken by Granger grabbing his shoulder.
Come on, we have to help him.
Harper shook his head slowly. He felt like he was waking up from a deep sleep as his brain fog dissipated and his muscles prepared to fire. He slung Granger's hand away from him.
He's dead already,
Harper said.
And we will be too if we don't get out of here now.
Granger sneered at him.
Coward,
he said and rushed toward Pastor. Harper didn't bother with a retort and instead sprinted for the stairs, taking them two at a time, pushing the fear of falling out of his head. He was nearly to the first floor when he heard Granger's screams descend eerily through the stairwell. He flung the stairwell door open wide and stopped himself before he ran headlong into Staff Sergeant James. Well, if it isn't Keith, your very important meeting is already over? Must not have been.
He's coming,
Harper said between pants of heavy breathing.
You've got to stop him. He's killed at least 2 people, maybe more. I don't know.
Staff Sergeant James squinted at him suspiciously. What the hell are you on about? Before he could reply, thudding footsteps like hoofbeats thundered in the stairwell.
Oh, God. Oh, God, you've got to stop him,
Harper cried, grabbing James by his body armor. James shoved him, and Harper fell back, pinwheeling his arms to no avail. He struck a low chair-side table and cried out as he hit the ground. Don't you ever touch me, James spat. Fucking civvies, thinking you've got the run of everything. Coddled and spoiled. James was still ranting, but Harper didn't hear him. He was fixated on Pastor's leering yellow face as it appeared over the Staff Sergeant's shoulder. Pastor grabbed the man and spun him around. What the fuck? Was all James managed to utter before Pastor delivered a headbutt hard enough to cave in the man's face. Hot blood fell over Harper, and he screamed, staring down at the blood on his hands and his pants. Pastor dropped the man to the ground unceremoniously. The sharp bones protruding from his forehead were caked with gore. His expression changed, suddenly a mask of confusion, then of understanding.
You're a doctor, right?
Pastor said.
Please, you have to help me. It's like there's something in my bones that wants out, and I can't stop it. It just keeps pushing and pushing, and it wants you all dead, and I can't stop it. I'm losing me. Do you understand? I don't know how much more time I'll be in here, in my head, 'cause it won't stop. Oh, God, help me. Help me.
A cacophony of cries and gunfire erupted in the lobby. The young SWAT guys Harper had run into earlier had opened fire, and Pastor jerked spasmodically with the impact of each bullet. Pastor fell. Harper should have been grateful, but instead he was horrified as he watched new white blood-slick bone emerge from the man's wounds. The protrusions met and knitted together until they were flat plates of bone against his skin.
He's armoring himself,
Harper thought.
Jesus Christ, help us.
Pastor rose with a growl and sped towards his attacker, loping magnificently like a beast after prey, like he'd been doing it his whole life, like he was a different species evolved perfectly to have this form. Harper already knew how this was going to play out and wasted no time finding his footing and running for the door. The Texas morning was already too warm for him, but he savored every breath of fresh air as he ran across the parking lot, finally collapsing onto the manicured grass at the lot's edge. He stared up at the sky, his chest rising and falling, his hands shaking. It wasn't until then he noticed that the morning wasn't silent. Sirens seemed to come from everywhere, punctuated by random bursts of noise from car horns. Faint screams were carried to his ears from the slight morning breeze. From somewhere came the god-awful bang of 2 vehicles colliding. Finally, there came another sound, a screech that drowned everything else out. 2 jets screamed through the sky above him. He didn't know what kind they were. He didn't know shit about jets. But he had seen enough movies to recognize the sound of missiles being unleashed, the telltale whoosh of their ignition, the shriek of their flight, towards millions of people, towards Houston. Harper didn't rise. He continued to stare into the blue, preferring to hear the end of the world rather than witness it with his own eyes.
Although stress and chaos are the natural order at a hospital, few things serve to rattle doctors and nurses more than death. The cold, procedural actions undertaken before, during, and after a passing contrast heavily with the unrestrained drama surrounding the patient and their families. No matter the circumstances, there never seems to be a clean, perfect death. There's always questions about what could have been done differently, whether or not the patient had the will to live. What would become of the relatives now that one of their beloved had stepped over to the dark plane of non-living, never to look back? Few people, however, consider the polar opposite, even though it very often serves to be just as affecting. Ignoring the trauma and physical toll labor imparts on a mother, childbirth is often accompanied by its own raucous spectacles. Arguments over who gets to see the baby and who doesn't. Fights between the two fathers over whose child it really is. Not to mention the entanglement of troubles befallen on a teenage or unwed mother, and those around her, if there's anyone at all. Childbirth may be beautiful, but as any farmer would tell you, one cannot bear fruit without some bad spots. The maternity ward, therefore, was the last place Rita Park wanted to be on Christmas Eve. But with all the other OBGYNs out of town for the holidays, and the hospital understaffed as it was, she just had to suck it up, rub the sleep from her eyes, and drive the 20 miles down the dark, empty streets at 10 p.m. to get back to work. Thankfully, upon her arrival, there were only 2 patients in the maternity ward. Gabriella had been Rita's patient since the news of her pregnancy broke back in March. She was a sweet girl of 25, nervous but determined to see her own way through. She was also a single mother. Her partner Damien, nicknamed D-Bag during their many appointments, had dumped her and skipped town the morning after she emerged from the bathroom with a positive test. Her parents, supportive and loving as they were, could not be there to attend their daughter's labor. She had no other immediate family either. Rita almost wished D-Bag could be in the room, despite his non-commitment. No expectant mother ought to be alone and in labor on Christmas Eve. Rita smiled at her as she assessed her condition.
Everything's going smoothly, she reassured her. You're in good hands, Gabrielle. Just relax and let the process play out, okay? Remember, it's all natural.
The young woman gave a nod and a wan smile, taking a soothing breath.
I have to step out of the room for a moment,
Rita explained further.
Just shout if you need me, okay?
She hadn't yet seen her second patient for the night, but when she walked down the hallway and into the ward's other occupied room, she was slammed by a semi-truck of recognition.
Miss Rita,
the woman proclaimed.
Haven't seen you in a hot while. Has your heart wandered away from church's good graces?
Maureen Delaney was, in the most polite terms, the town kook. An unwed shut-in who only emerged to prostrate herself in the foremost pews at church whenever the spirit moved her. She was also notorious for her vow of abstinence, having never pursued a man in her life, or given the few potential suitors who approached her the tiniest bit of credence. So Rita found herself rightfully confused upon seeing the woman's laden abdomen rising up from under the sheets.
Miss Delaney,
Rita said in a small voice as she entered the room.
I didn't know you were pregnant.
And I didn't know you worked here,
Maureen said with a smile.
Goes to show how much has changed since you stopped coming to Mass.
Rita had to conceal her grimace as she leaned forward to assess Maureen. She could have sworn self-righteousness was a sin, but engaging in theological debates with someone like Maureen was a fate worse than death to her. It was true, Rita hadn't been going back to church in recent years, but that didn't change what was really pressing on her mind.
So, did you end up marrying after all?
She asked. Maureen was pushing well into her 40s, relatively late to marry. Definitely late to start having children.
No, ma'am,
Maureen said, almost proudly.
Well then, who's the father?
Maureen smiled.
Oh, sweetheart. Nobody.
Rita did a double take.
Excuse me?
I'm as pure and unspoiled as the day I was born, Miss Rita,
she said.
Never gave my virginity to any man. Never even teased my carnal desires. And just look at me now, ripe with child. A virgin birth, due on the 25th. You're cloudy with the faith, but I'm sure even you know the significance of that.
Rita's lips parted and closed again. If she wasn't lying about not being with a man or receiving any artificial procedures, the only other logical explanation was phantom pregnancy, But Maureen had indeed begun dilating, which never happened in pseudocyesis.
The Lord is coming swift upon us,
Maureen decreed in a breathy voice.
And when he takes his first steps through this wicked world, pray and hold fast, for it might be all you'll have time to do.
Rita turned and exited the room, a mite too briskly to hide her unease. She had to have been lying, or crazy. A coincidence, a medical anomaly. She returned to Gabriella to find her face contorted in pain, trembling hands over her stomach.
All right, contraction?
Said Rita, barely batting an eye. I think so, Gabriella gasped, huffing and puffing air. Who's the other lady down the hall?
Some nutcase I knew from church a few years back.
Rita replied lowly, examining her again.
She's claiming she got pregnant through divine intervention.
Divine intervention, Gabriella parroted. Wait. Tomorrow's Christmas, isn't it?
Coincidence, I'm sure,
said Rita.
She's the last person I'd expect to carry the second coming of Jesus in her womb,
she added, rolling her eyes.
You're doing great. I'd say another hour or so before active labor, okay?
Thank you, Gabriella said, closing her eyes as if wishing to do nothing more than simply drift off. Rita offered another smile before stepping out. The more she approached Maureen's room, the heavier some invisible shadow of dread seemed to blanket across her. She tried her best to adopt her professional facade as she entered the room.
I hear you whispering with that scarlet girl across the way,
Maureen sneered as Rita resumed examination.
You doubt the coming of our Savior.
Not necessarily, no,
Rita replied, still stony-faced.
Just, you.
Well, if your ears refuse to believe, try your eyes,
said Maureen, holding out her hands. Rita glanced up and nearly shouted. Glaringly prominent on the woman's palms were twin walnut-sized sores, a patch of inflamed red capped with single black heads.
And if you care to look, Missy, you'll find the exact same sores on my feet,
she boasted. Rita hunched over her open palms, eyebrows scrunched. Maureen shook her head.
They appeared about a month ago, and since you can't seem to find the word for it, I'll fill you in. Stigmata. The crucifixion wounds that Jesus Christ endured.
Rita looked over at her. She still couldn't believe it. Not a damn word. But there was one more discrepancy she had to address.
Okay, you've dilated 6 centimeters,
she observed.
Are you feeling any pain?
Maureen cocked her head and stared.
Does this face look like it's in pain, dear?
Rita took a subconscious step back. Maureen seemed to wallow in Rita's discomfort. Suddenly, the frail, heavily pregnant woman sprawled on a hospital bed elicited a bizarre, airy dread unlike anything she had known before.
Mary never felt labor pains either,
Maureen assured as Rita exited the room.
Seems like my body is a most worthy vessel. Wouldn't you say?
Rita felt like she was walking through smog as she made her way back to Gabriella. Her head was foggy. Her throat constricted. The edges of her eyes stung. It was incongruous, flying in the face of everything she knew and was trained for. Rita, I think my water broke, said Gabriella as Rita entered the room. Rita went for a check.
Yeah, it definitely has,
she confirmed.
The active labor stage is soon to follow. The contractions will become more frequent and intense.
Okay, Gabriella breathed, eyes scrunched shut. God, I can't do this.
You can, and you will,
Rita promised.
Breathe in, gather up all that tension, and blow it out of your mouth, okay? Let it go.
Gabriella relaxed, seeming to sink into her mattress as she exhaled.
There we go,
said Rita.
I'm gonna stick around for a while, so I'll be right here if you need me.
So, Jesus Lady is doing fine? Gabriella asked. Rita sighed.
I don't know. She's actively dilating, yet she claims to not feel pain.
Just like the Virgin Mary, said Gabriella. Rita gave a wince.
Yes, just like her.
They both went silent for a moment. Gabriella seized up again, racked with another contraction. Oh, fuck, she hissed. Oh, shit. Oh, my God. Ah!
Temporary,
Rita said calmly.
Remember, it's temporary. You'll get past it. Just think of your child.
Do you have children, Rita? Gabriella asked. She shook her head.
No, can't say why I never went that route. It didn't happen.
Gabriella nodded, but she didn't seem reassured as she tensed and breathed past the pain. Rita sighed again, her hand drifting through thin air. She wanted something to hold on to. Another person's hand, preferably, something to give her comfort and anchor her to reality. Jesus Lady frightened her, definitely, but the poor lonely girl, racked with labor pains strewn before her, wasn't helping.
Excuse me,
she said, stepping out into the hall.
Just shout if you need me.
Out in the hallway, it was nothing but sterile fluorescent lighting and the stark, sanitated walls that stretched on in both directions. Only the muffled beeps of machinery and the buzz of electricity kept the space from becoming a vacuum. There were no footsteps, no other voices besides the occasional labor pang. Rita checked her watch, seeing it was now 11 o'clock. Barely an hour until Christmas, one of the holiest days of the year, and she was spending it alone and torn between two separate worlds of misery and trouble. Even if she got through tonight without a hitch, this Christmas was going to be unusually bleak. She didn't know how long she had drifted off, but the sounds of screaming brought her back to earth. She bolted towards the source of the noise, against her expectations, into Maureen Delaney's room. Her mouth was agape, eyes wide, arms and legs spread like a Vertuvian woman, the sores on her palms in full view, but her lips were stretched into a smile, and her screaming had devolved into shrieking laughter.
"You faithless harlot!"
Maureen spat.
"See revelation unfold before you!"
Rita's first instinct was to check down below, but a flash of red higher up stopped her. Blood was blooming underneath the white sheets emanating from Maureen's side.
Oh, shit!
Rita cursed, throwing the sheets back. The left side of Maureen's gown bore a blood-soaked slit that revealed the lesion in her engorged abdomen, disconcertingly similar to a stab wound.
What happened? What did you do?
Rita shouted, scrambling for a medical kit.
"This was God's hand,"
Maureen cried with glee.
"The wound Christ endured after he died on the cross."
All right, enough of this,
Rita blurted, pulling Maureen's gown back. Blood spilled from her like a leaky hose as Rita wiped it away and ready to gauze Patch. The blood suddenly took on a desaturated quality, and soon two streams of liquid were pouring from Maureen, one red, the other clear as crystal. Rita's first crazed thought was amniotic fluid, but the wound wasn't deep enough to have punctured any organs. Pus? She guessed next, but there was no sign of infection either. It was odorless and cool to the touch, almost like
water gushing from my side.
Maureen sobbed, wearing a tear-stricken smile.
Just like our crucified Lord. Oh, praise God. I praise you. I am eternally at your hand.
Rita applied the gauze, stemming the flow, and drew her pager.
I need a doctor in here right now,
she bellowed out into the hallway. But the very air seemed to absorb her plea, rendering her voiceless beyond the lonesome ward.
To hell with your doctors,
Maureen sneered.
Get yourself a priest.
Oh, shut the fuck up,
Rita snapped.
Temper,
Maureen mocked.
Might want to cleanse your tongue before you confess to our Lord.
Fresh screams erupted from down the hall, belonging to a younger woman.
Shit,
Rita cursed, setting another gauze patch before rushing into the hallway.
Anyone, room 222, right now!
She yelled down the soundless hall. She ran into Gabriella's room. The girl was heaving with agonizing breaths, bunches of sheets clenched in her fists. It hurts too much, she cried, her eyes wet and shiny.
Okay, breathe, deep breaths,
said Rita.
You're at 8 centimeters. Everything's going as it should, okay?
I can't do this, said Gabriella. No, I can't.
You can, and you will,
said Rita.
Relax, release the tension from your face, deep breaths. It'll be okay, I promise.
How the fuck would you know? Gabriella fired back. You've never been through this in your life.
Gabriella, relax and breathe, please,
said Rita, her composure beginning to crack. Gabriella emitted a painful cry and spasmed.
Do you want an epidural?
Rita then offered. Anything, Gabriella pleaded, sweat and tears gleaming on her red face. Rita whipped out her pager and sent out a message. Epidural, room 221, stat.
Okay, the anesthesiologist will be here shortly,
Rita told her. Why can't you do it? Gabriella demanded.
I'm not authorized to administer one,
Rita answered through gritted teeth. Please hurry, Gabriella moaned, her eyes closing. Another strangled yell emitted from Maureen's room.
Oh, God help me, I'm losing my mind,
Rita thought as she scrambled to the other woman's room. Maureen was sitting up and grinning broadly once more, and Rita thought the woman's hair was damp and sweaty and plastered down her face, until it smeared and dripped, and she realized with horror it was blood, trailing down in ruby ribbons down the sides of her head.
Racked with thorns,
Maureen proclaimed.
The thorns that crowned our beloved's head.
Maureen, lay back!
Rita shouted as she rushed for another roll of gauze. As she approached the woman, she saw the wound in her side was flowing freely again, blood and water seeping past the soggy gauze. Rita applied a fresh patch, wiping away the congealing slick staining Maureen's skin and sheets, and went to wrap gauze around her head. At this, Maureen reached out and grasped Rita's wrists.
No more,
Maureen rasped.
I am festering with stigmata. Can't you see that, you silly girl? Let my wounds bleed. Let this sacred pain consume me. Maybe I won't just deliver him. Maybe I'll become him. Our infant Lord will repossess me after his birth and take my body and soul for his own.
Enough!
Rita snapped, throwing Maureen's hands off her, hands that still bore the same ugly punctures. She held down Maureen's body as she applied a strip of gauze across Maureen's wounds and tied it off.
God will remember how you attempted to gild his doings,
Maureen snarled.
Where the fuck are the doctors?
Rita silently cried. Gabriella's upwelling screams tugged at her mind like a ravaging dog.
Shoot me,
Rita choked as she rushed out to attend to her other patient. Gabriella resembled a bloated carcass, grimy and moist with perspiration and tears. Rita confirmed she had nearly fully dilated. The pain would be over soon. All the suffering would be worth it. Where's the epidural? Gabriella breathed, too exhausted to speak up.
I don't know,
said Rita. She reached forth and grasped Gabriella's sweaty palm.
You've got this. It's almost over. You'll get past this.
I'm sorry, Gabriella wheezed. For everything.
Shh. It's okay, sweetheart. It's all okay,
said Rita, now squeezing with both hands. It's horrible. It hurts. I'll give up anything to make it stop, she gasped.
If only the goddamn epidural would get here,
Rita pleaded. But she was certain of it this time. She was alone in the ward. The floor, perhaps the entire hospital. Her desperate messages and cries for help had met only empty, uncaring air. As time trickled on, her thoughts crowded by Gabriella's agony and Maureen's ghastly jubilation, Rita prayed. If the second coming of God were truly upon them, and he would come to dispense justice upon the world from this one lonely maternity ward in Middle America, she prayed that at least Gabriella would be saved. Gabriella and her child, especially her child, whom she prayed would grow up happy and healthy with a mother who loved him. Oh God, I think it's coming, Gabriella finally said.
Yes, the baby's crowning,
Rita confirmed after dipping down to check.
Breathe. Now, 1, 2, 3, push!
Gabriella obeyed, forcing herself past the pain. Rita exhaled with relief. She almost forgot about the imminent rapture down the hall.
No!
Maureen's voice, this time throttled with sheer terror, scared Rita more than anything else had that night. Rita sighed with resolve.
I'm sorry,
she said to Gabriella before leaving her to run to Maureen. The woman was covered with blood, caking her stomach, her face and head, her wounds bleeding past the gauze. But Maureen was gazing at her palms, evidently horrified at her stigmata sores.
What is this?
She shrieked, holding them out to Rita.
Fix them! Get them out!
Rita nearly gagged. The wounds had opened up. Things, little insect-like things, were crawling around in the concoction of pus and blood and frayed skin. Underneath the bunched-up sheets by her feet, more bugs were crawling about, having just emerged from the sores down there, too.
Plague! Evil!
Maureen screamed, and Rita then caught a glimpse of what was crowning between Maureen's legs. It was no baby.
No,
Rita said in a small voice. The insects took flight, black and blue blowflies sprouting from Maureen's palms and feet like a fountain, buffeting through the air in a living tornado. The lights flickered, strobing like a rave, and Rita fled, leaving the flies, the carnage, Maureen's screams behind. And it was fear that made her run, abandoning the woman to the mercy of whatever had corrupted her. The lights were still strobing as Rita returned to Gabriella.
Push!
Rita urged.
Push! Let's end this!
Gabriella screamed and pushed. Once more screamed and pushed. And again, once more. And the baby came forth into the world.
A boy,
Rita said, a smile breaking on her face.
It's a boy.
Donning a pair of gloves, she got to work clamping and severing the cord and wrapping him up in a blanket. But as she took a closer look at him, something was wrong. He wasn't making any sound. No crying, no coughing up. He wasn't even moving. Rita set her fingertip on the infant's forearm, feeling for a pulse. Despite her frantic state of mind, she could detect something, the minute beating of a tiny heart. She nearly passed out from relief. But what was wrong with him?
Where is he?
Gabriella croaked, too weak to lift her head.
Is everything all right?
Before Rita could reply, a new voice entered the void. It was a curdling, gurgling, impertinent tone, dripping with salaciousness that seemed to come both from Maureen's room and inside Rita's mind.
I thank you for playing along, you prideful bitch.
And from Maureen's room came one final deathly bellow, the bellow of a dying woman, a sound of tragedy and betrayal that sputtered off into rattling chokes, then silence.
Who was that?
Gabriella moaned.
Take him,
Rita said, handing off the bundle to her. She blinked against the flickering lights, trying to steady her head. Then, all pretense of instinctive self-preservation gone, she treaded out into the hallway. The beast met her there. Superficially, it did indeed resemble Jesus, but its skin was gone, revealing only pulsating, blood-soaked muscle, the piercing red of raw beef. Its hair was a tangle of black, thorny brambles that crawled down its back, sticking into its flesh at odd angles. Its eyes were blank white, like marble, yet still staring down at Rita, seeing her and much, much more with full clarity.
And I thank you for assisting in my delivery,
it said. Its toothy mouth moved, and Rita heard its voices again, one from the beast, one in her head. The word came to Rita's lips, ridiculous as it sounded, but she somehow knew there was no better substitute.
Antichrist.
Perceptive, aren't you?
It jeered.
Now, where is my brother? My other half?
Your body?
Rita whimpered.
The vessel I pumped into that fornicator.
It snapped.
So that I may grow and walk among the people as a man. Bring me to him.
Rita understood. The truth slid down her throat and sat putrescently in her gut. She shook her head.
No.
Some loose organs lodged in the beast's throat shuddered with what could have been a sigh.
Impertinence will get you nowhere.
It flicked his hand, and Rita's skull became grasped in a psychic fist, squeezing her and forcing her to the ground. Immobilized, she could only watch as the Antichrist took loping, leaking steps past her and inside Gabriella's room.
No!
Rita choked, crawling towards it.
Not after all this!
Damien? Gabriella's voice said. Damien, you came. You came back.
Yes,
it crooned.
Now, let me see our son.
Guess you're not so much of a D-bag after all, she replied.
No!
Rita called out, knowing full well that whatever Gabriella was seeing and hearing wasn't real, wasn't the reality behind all that had happened tonight. She rounded the doorway, still unable to stand. She saw the beast standing over the bedridden woman, the comatose infant in its hands.
No!
Rita blubbered again, lunging at the beast's ankle. Her fingers dug into its flesh. It was like a burning gelatin that squished and rotted in her grasp. The beast kicked her away. It lifted the lifeless child into the air, as if holding it to the light. Then its lipless jaw opened, wide like a snake, and it lowered the baby down its gullet. Rita's vision blackened, unable, unwilling to process what had just happened before her mortal eyes.
You've seen too much,
the Antichrist whispered.
You fulfilled your purpose. This world has no more place for you now. You can join Marine Delaney.
A red, veiny palm reached down over Rita's face, and everything went dark. It had been the most traumatic experience of her life. The heartbreak of Damien leaving her the day she announced she was pregnant had been horrible too, but the pain Gabriella had felt from that came from just a sore chest and tightened throat. All that had happened to her today, she wouldn't have wished it upon her worst enemy. In the end, however, it was worth it. Her infant son stirred in her arms, his little face pressed against her chest, tiny fingers grasping feebly at nothing. He coughed up some congested fluid, but Gabriella didn't care. He was beautiful. She had seen newborn babies before this, and at first she was repulsed, if she was being honest. To her, they resembled more alien monkeys than anything with an ounce of actual human genes. Yet he seemed full, more developed than those other newborns. His face was truly adorable. His skin was satin smooth. He even had hair, thin black hair that seemed perfectly combed down his scalp. And as he opened his mouth to yawn, Gabriella swore she saw budding teeth in his gums. Strange. She thought teeth didn't come in until much later. The room was quiet. Hell, the entire hospital seemed quiet. She looked around, wondering where her nurse had gone. What was her name? Ruth? But it was the clock hanging on the wall that caught her attention next. The time was 2:34 a.m., December 25th. Just like she had been secretly, giddily hoping in her heart, her child had been born on Christmas. "Merry Christmas, little one," she whispered down to him. The baby looked up at her, and Gabriella could only wonder what was really going on behind those infant eyes.
I watch my fingers as I curl them into my palms. One by one, I force them to open and close. I see them. I feel the skin stretch under the dried blood coating my knuckles, but they don't feel like my hands. Not anymore. A shadow darkens the asphalt below my feet as a pair of white tennis shoes appears beside my work boots. Tip your head back. The paramedic presses her finger under my chin, coaxing my head to rise. I notice the ID badge hanging around her neck. Alicia. Her dark skin, kind eyes, and slight smile invite me in, but I force my eyes away. "Those people are alive because of you," she whispers and dabs a cloth at the cut along my hairline. The antiseptic burns, but it's not enough to keep my gaze from returning to my hands. "No," I whisper. A loud cough cuts me off. It pulls my attention to another ambulance parked just a few dozen feet away. I glance over just in time to see a man in a suit, a detective, I guess, step back from a body bag on a gurney. He takes out a notepad and scribbles something down, nodding like he's talking to someone. One of the uniformed officers gathered around the gurney steps forward, and that's when I see him. Craig, my boss. With eyes wild, blonde hair matted against his head from his hard hat, a cigarette pinched between his fore and middle finger, one for each hand. He waves his arm across the parking lot. No doubt he's giving the police an animated description of what he saw from his office window. Then he shoves one of his cigarettes between his lips and inhales hard. It's a familiar motion, one I've seen dozens of times almost every day. My chest aches as I think about what just happened. I flex my hands against the blood caked on my knuckles just to break whatever spell his movement holds over me. I can't look at him. If I do, I might break. "This might sting," Alicia whispers,
pulling my thoughts back to the here and now. She dabs my knuckles with a cloth. Even through the blue rubber gloves she wears, her hand feels delicate in my palm. So small, like my wife's, like Jess's. The thought burns and I take a deep, ragged breath to make the pieces floating in my mind fall into place. Nothing makes sense. Not anymore. I suppose I should have seen it coming. All the cutesy stuff died out years ago. The pet names, hand-holding, the little love messages we left for each other to find. I'm not sure when it happened exactly, or why. I guess between both our jobs, trying to keep up with the bills and everything else, we just sort of stopped trying. We fought more, hugged less, until yelling was all we did. And then that stopped too. Almost like neither of us cared enough to even fight anymore. But I was going to change all that. This anniversary was going to be different. I stood at the counter of the flower shop. A little glass jar sat by the register with 2 sticks of incense poking out of the top. Their thin trail of smoke couldn't compete with the scent of roses and carnations filling the air. A smile pulled at my lips. I couldn't help but wonder if even the smell of roses got annoying after a while. The crinkle of cellophane pulled my attention to the girl working behind the counter as she wrapped my bouquet. She flashed me a tired-looking smile and asked, "Who's the lucky lady?" "My wife." I peeled a couple 20s from my money clip and tossed them on the counter. "It's our anniversary today. 10 years. "Wow," she blinked, handing me the roses. "That's a long time. What's your secret?" A chuckle rumbled in my throat. It's one of those questions people always ask, but I don't ever have an answer. So I smiled, tucked the bouquet under my arm, and gave her the response I always give when someone asks before heading out the door. "Don't get divorced." I slid into my Focus, chucked the flowers on the passenger seat, and checked my phone. 3 messages, 1 confirming the dinner reservations and 2 from Hank. I talked him into picking up the rest of my shift so I could make today special for Jess. But Hank's an abide-by-the-rules kind of guy. Everything has to be cleared by the boss, and Craig wasn't there. I told Hank it'd be fine, that I'd cleared up with Craig later, and I had left him a message, but he hadn't responded yet. I clicked open Hank's message asking if I had heard back. I texted him back that I hadn't, but not to worry. I'd take the heat. Laughing, I tossed the phone beside the flowers on the seat and started the car. Craig and I had been friends for years. There wasn't going to be any heat. I spent the rest of the drive thinking about the time Craig, Jess, and I went on a float trip with him and his latest girlfriend. Triss, or maybe it'd been Alex. It was hard to keep up with. I guess Craig's always been kind of a man whore, but he's a great guy. Quick to laugh and always the first to lend a hand when someone's in need. Pulling off the highway, I turned onto my street, replaying the moment the floating beer cooler he brought on that trip disappeared in the rapids in my mind. Thinking about how he ditched his kayak and dove in after it still made me shake my head. When my house came into view, Craig's truck stood waiting in the driveway. I snorted out a laugh. It was just like him to pull something like this. At Christmas, he showed up at midnight in a red suit and beard with a bottle of peppermint schnapps. A big grin pulled at my face as I stopped at the curb and killed the engine. I didn't have any idea what he planned this time, but whatever he was up to, it couldn't take long. He had the next shift at the factory. I grabbed the flowers and my phone from the passenger seat and headed up the driveway. The garage door was open again, 3rd time this week. I muttered as I fumbled the house key free from the others and slid it into the lock, wondering if one of the neighbors' garage door openers was on the same frequency. The scent of cigarettes hit the moment I stepped into the kitchen, slapping my grin into a scowl. I must have told him at least 100 times not to smoke in the house. I just laid my phone down on the counter when I caught a glimpse of 2 long-stem glasses standing on the table, along with an empty bottle of champagne. I dropped the flowers beside the glasses and flicked the side of the bottle. It didn't make sense. Craig was a beer guy. What did he need champagne? And that's when I see it. The small black dress on the floor by the fridge, halfway between the kitchen and the hallway. I bent down and pinched at the edge of Jess's dress, when a low moan drew my attention to the bedroom at the end of the hall. I let the dress slip through my fingers as my mind stumbled to put the pieces together. "Oh, God," Craig's voice sighed. My blood turned to ice. I crept to the doorway and glanced down the hall toward my bedroom. There he was. They were. Craig and Jess. Her legs wrapped around his hips, her fingernails dug into his naked back as he moved over her. I crept further back into the kitchen just as a high-pitched squeal echoed in my ears. It pierced so loud. I couldn't think. Snatching the roses and my phone, I stumbled out of the house, closing the door behind me. Numb. Broken. I needed air. I climbed into the car more like a zombie than a man. Without conscious knowledge, I shoved my key into the ignition, the car roared to life, and I pulled away from the curb. Buildings, cars, and signs drifted past my window like something out of a dream, mere shadows that couldn't fully break into the reality playing out over and over in my mind. The stink of Craig's cigarettes, the feel of black silk between my fingers, the rhythmic squeak of the bed. My nails dug into the steering wheel. The deep concrete canyons of the inner city shrunk, replaced by the mind-numbing monotony of suburbia. He had been my friend since high school. We had stuck together even when all our other friends drifted away. I was more than his friend. I was his brother, and this is how he repaid me. I don't know how long I drove, until barbed wire replaced privacy fences, houses became cattle, and the city loomed in my rearview mirror like a storm on the horizon. But I couldn't force the image from my mind. Details I hadn't noticed, now etched in my memory, replaying over and over with perfect clarity, driving me mad. Jess's red fingernail polish, the slight tremble in her hands as she clawed at him, the little red crescent-shaped marks and scratches down Craig's back. Heart pounding in my ears, my eyes flicked back to the empty two-lane road winding off into the distance. I didn't care where it went. It didn't matter. My life, my marriage, was over. A yellow sign whizzed past my window. I slammed on the brakes and backed up to get a closer look. It wasn't much, just a piece of cardboard nailed to an old wooden fence post. It read, "Yard sale. Tools, appliances, and guns." Right at the bridge. Guns. I closed my eyes and looked away, but the image came rushing back. Every sound, every scent, Jess's moan. Her fingers curled into Craig's shoulder blades. His shoulder blades. My nose twitched. He had his back to me. And Jess. I summoned the image one more time. She was behind him, under him. I couldn't see her face. My eyes burst open. They didn't see me. They don't know I was there. Snatching my phone off the passenger seat, I swiped my finger across the screen. It was only 4 in the afternoon. I tossed it back onto the seat and shifted the car into drive. It wasn't a plan, not even an idea, more like a feeling, a purpose. Without realizing it, I started to sing, soft and slow. The same tune Dad sung when he went out to the shed to give Mom some space after a fight. The same hymn. Shall we gather at the river? Gravel popped under the tires as I rolled forward, in almost the same rhythm Dad's hammer did as he pounded away at his workbench on those nights. The reservation was for 8. There was no hurry. I had plenty of time. A few hours later, I was at the restaurant. Jess sat across the table. Seeing her in the same black dress I found on the floor earlier sent acid rising in my throat, but I managed to choke it down. I tipped my menu, enough to watch her type a message onto her phone without moving enough to draw her attention. Her face flushed. A smile crept up her cheek, and she covered her mouth with her fingers before typing another message. "Champagne?" I asked, laying my menu onto the table. Her shoulders twitched. "Huh?" She dropped her phone to her lap and forced an apologetic smile, but her eyes drifted back down before finding me again. "Sorry. No, I think I'd rather have some wine." Her eyes twinkled a brief moment but dropped again too quickly. She wasn't there with me. She was with him. Craig. Where bright angel feet have trod. The words echoed in my ears as I picked up the menu again. For that brief moment when her eyes held mine, I had forgiven everything. But now, the image of the paper bag sitting on my workbench in the garage stuck in my mind. The old Remington 870 I had bought at the yard sale. All I needed were the shells. Jess giggled. I lowered my menu. She glanced up at me and rolled her eyes, pretending it was nothing. It's just Sarah from work. She texted me this joke. I'll tell you about it later. Her voice trailed away as her eyes went back to the phone, which she had picked up again from her lap. I wanted to believe her. I wished I could. But the blush of her neck and the rapid rise and fall of her chest left no room for doubt. She lied. The waiter came. When he asked for our order, I leaned forward and indicated the most expensive wine they had. His eyebrow raised, and I informed him that tonight was our anniversary, and my wife deserved nothing less. He offered his congratulations, complimented Jess on how lovely she looked, but her eyes never left her phone. At first, when the waiter poured the wine and I lifted my glass with an exaggerated, "To us," she blinked up from her phone. Her gaze shifted between me and her wine. She took up her glass, swirled the clear liquid, and seemed to be staring at it as a smile spread across her lips, but her gaze focused on an object just beyond the wine. The brightness of the screen shimmered against the glass's surface. "To love," she whispered, tapped her glass against mine, and drank. My jaw clenched. This was a farce. I was just about to slam my glass down and storm out when Jess turned off her phone and placed it beside her plate on the table. The muscles in my jaw relaxed. Maybe I was wrong, seeing things that weren't there. I needed to be sure. I set down my wine. So, what was Lisa's joke about? I switched the name of Jess's co-worker with that of her friend, wondering if she had noticed, and not sure if I hoped she would. "Lisa?" Jess puffed out her cheeks and let the air back out again in an obvious search for what I meant. With sudden fervor, she waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, that. It was about how she's starting to want to sniff butts when she goes out on dates. You know, like a dog. Since she's a dog walker, it wasn't that funny." Whatever shine her eyes had disappeared as she took her glass and gave the wine a swirl. Sorry. I'm a little slow, I guess. I tried to cough it off, but the muscles in my face tightened in anger. It was so easy for her to sit there, right across the table, and lie to me. Jess reached out and took my hand. "Is something wrong?" "Nah," I grunted. I rubbed my thumb across the red polish on her nails. The same nails that dug into Craig's back. My chest ached, but from anger or pain, I couldn't tell. "Come on." She lifted my hand and planted a kiss on my knuckles. "We've been married for 10 years. I know that look. What's on your mind?" My gaze lingered on the place her lips touched. I just hoped we could have the evening to ourselves. I tried to ignore the cold numbness left behind from her kiss. Like poison. "But you've been on the phone all evening." I didn't want it to sound as whiny as it did. She tipped her head to the side. "You're right. I'll tell you what, I'm going to run to the John, and when I get back, we'll start over. Just you and me." I nodded. She gave my hand another kiss, and then pushed back her chair, giving my hand one last squeeze as she left. "Be right back." I watched her vanish behind a potted plant, and then snatched her phone from the table. I typed in her PIN and went over her recent texts. All Craig, all about what he was going to do to her the next time he could sneak away. My hand tightened until the plastic creaked. I checked her other texts, the ones just before we left. Jess wasn't lying. Sarah, Lisa, Amy, they had all texted her, each one asking about her rendezvous with Craig. The rhythm of Dad's pounding screamed in my head. They all knew. Everyone at the daycare, all her friends, neighbors, everyone at work. I clicked back to the screen it was on when she left and laid it back next to her untouched plate. All I could think about was the shotgun. It was a goose gun. The barrel was way too long to hide under my jacket. The stock, too. But that could be remedied. I fumbled my time card out of its slot on the rack, the same way I did every morning, and just like every other morning, I slid the paper into the notch and hit the button on the top of the clock, wondering if Craig was ever going to update to a new system. It thunked just as a rap sounded on the glass behind me. My jaw clenched, but I swallowed the rage and turned around with my usual morning smirk firmly in place. Craig tapped at his watch from the other side of the window. I forced my jaw to relax. I needed to keep calm and play it cool or they'd win. Taking a deep breath, I shrugged, pantomimed driving, and shrugged again. It wasn't the first time traffic made me late. He shook his head with an understanding nod and sat back down at his desk. Shall we gather at the river? I took my hard hat from its hook on the wall and jammed it on my head. The image of me walking through the door, going to the time clock, and instead of punching in, pulling the gun from under my jacket and shooting him in the head through the glass played through my mind. I fished a couple of foam earplugs from the bin by the door to the factory, pressed them into my ears, and went inside. The dull thrum of heavy machinery vibrated through my body in time with the hymn playing in my mind. No one back here would hear a gun blast. I could kill Craig and be at the daycare before anyone even knew he was dead. It would work. But then I caught a glimpse of the friendly secretary, Mary, sitting at her desk. Dad's pounding faded. She'd notice. Her death would go as smoothly as Craig's, but I didn't want her dead. Her smile was like a ray of sunshine every shift, and her husband was a nice guy too, or so I heard. Pictures of her daughter stretched out like a timeline across her desk. A sweet-looking girl with her mother's smile. Mary never harmed anyone, as far as I knew. It'd be wrong for her to die on account of Craig. I paused and let the thundering noises close in around me before turning to go find the one guy I knew who could help. Mary's special project, Hank. I wasn't sure where they met, but I do know he was down and out in the worst possible way, and she talked Craig into taking him on. Hank was likable enough, friendly, hard-working, eager to please, and reliable. But the guy attracted trouble like flies and garbage. Mary was always out of the office helping with something or other, goofy, unexpected things that just shouldn't happen. Like the exploding beans fiasco last week when he put a can on a hot pipe to warm up without poking a hole in the lid. I snorted back a laugh just thinking about it, but Hank was definitely my best shot at getting her out of harm's way. Blue tanks 3 stories high rose up around me like a gigantic six-pack. I ran my hand along the base of the nearest one, feeling for the telltale buzz of a blockage in the line. A smooth rumble coursed through my fingers, and I moved on to the next. Failing Hank, X-Lax and her coffee would work, I guessed, but knowing Craig, he'd want a cup too, and I needed him in the office. The tank was clear. I pulled my hand from its warmth and placed it on its neighbor. I could shoot him while he was on the toilet, but Mary or some other poor schmuck might hear and call the police. I'd never make it to Jess. The tank rumbled under my hand. Sludge, I whispered and splayed my fingers out against the smooth surface, searching for the familiar rattle of the outlet valve opening. But it wasn't there. It wasn't functioning. It needed to be opened manually. My gaze jumped to the catwalk at the top of the tanks where Hank should have been, but there was no sign of him. A low rippling crack vibrated through my knuckles. My blood turned to ice. There was too much pressure building. Way too much. If I didn't hurry, it was going to burst. Cursing under my breath, I sprinted to the end of the row and flew up the stairs 2 at a time. Hank! Hank! But when I got to the control station, Hank wasn't there. Ignoring the warning lights, I bolted down the catwalk and half slammed my shoulder into the wheel on the pressure relief valve. It groaned when I hit it, but nothing else. It wouldn't budge. I braced my foot against the pipe and pulled on the side of the wheel. Come on! It didn't move. I leaned in harder until the tendons in my arms stood out like ripcords, but the wheel refused to turn. Turn, dang you! The ribbon handles casting cut into palms as I jerked the valve back and forth, but it was useless. We were going to lose it. It would be like a bomb going off and set off a chain reaction big enough to take out the entire site. Just as I let go of the wheel and turned for the control station to sound the alarm, Hank barreled past me. Sweat mixed with the white powder coating his face as he jammed a pry bar into the webbing of the wheel and threw his weight against it. I rammed my shoulder into the bar along with him, praying that together could break it loose. The valve cracked. A deep shuddering groan shook the catwalk as Hank pried the valve until it spun freely. Finally, he fell to his knees panting. I flopped down beside him, slapping him on the shoulder as I landed on my backside. My hard hat bounced as it landed between my legs. I tossed Hank a tired smile to let him know it was all good, but he didn't smile back. Instead, he buried his face in his hands. The rumble of the factory made talking impossible, so I reached out my hand to grab his arm and let him know it'd be okay, but my eye caught on the white powder sticking to my hand. I stopped and rubbed the grit between my fingers, but even then it took a second to click as to what it was. Filtrate. I glanced back at Hank's shirt. He was covered in it. I must have gotten it on me when I slapped his shoulder. And that's when it hit me. Mary was seriously allergic to the stuff. I tapped Hank's hard hat and gestured for him to get down to the office. His shoulders slumped, but he nodded, pushed himself to his feet, and shuffled down the catwalk. I watched him go, grinning like an idiot despite the adrenaline buzzing in my ears. I couldn't have asked for anything more. The second Hank walked into the office with that powder on his clothes, Mary would go into anaphylactic shock. She kept an EpiPen handy, so she'd be fine, but it put her out for at least a couple of days. I literally could have kissed him. That evening, I stood at the workbench in my garage, humming. Jess went to bed a while ago, and I had taken to sleeping on the couch months before. Even so, I balanced an empty beer bottle on the doorknob to give warning if she tried to come in. Unlocking my tool chest, I pulled my hacksaw out of the bottom drawer, along with a rat tail file, and laid them beside the vise. I took an old rag from a bucket I kept hanging on a nail off the corner, then glanced back at the automatic garage door to make sure the lock was pressed into the track. Only when I was sure I was alone did I reach up on the shelf and pull my shotgun out of its hiding place behind the boxes of Christmas decorations. It was a strange sensation, watching my hands wrap the rag around the action and clamp it in the vise. They moved without feeling. Peaceful. My fingers snugged around the handle of the saw. I pressed the blade against the barrel, just where the magazine stopped, and started to saw, wondering if this is what Dad felt when he went into the shop on those nights he and Mom fought. I saw Craig's body moving in the same rhythm of the saw. Jess's moan echoed in the dull rasp of the blade, but there was no fury, not even a hint of pain. I hadn't planned any of it, not really. Every piece fell into place so neatly, my coming and going unnoticed, the yard sale and gun, the layout of the factory, even Hank's blunder, as if it were destiny. God's judgment for adultery. I was just the tool of his wrath. The barrel broke free. Still humming, I caught it to keep it from banging onto the floor and dropped it into the trash can. I didn't bother to try to hide it. There was no coming back for me. My life would end tomorrow no matter how this was about to play out. I moved to the other side of the vise, positioned the blade behind the round section of the wooden stock, and began to saw again. The wood sounded different. I don't know why, but it made me think of Jess's friends who worked with her at the daycare. I knew they'd be there when I went in, but I didn't care. They knew what she was doing, and not one of them told me. They gossiped and laughed at me behind my back. They deserved to die as much as she did. Yes, we'll gather at the river. The words danced from my lips as the stock broke loose in my hand. I tossed it in the trash with the barrel and picked up the file. The only thing I cared about was making sure There weren't any kids there when I showed up. But there wouldn't be. Jess went to work at 6. There was a field trip tomorrow. She told me last night she had to have lunch ready for them when they came back at noon. I stuffed the file in the end of the gun and cleaned out the ridge left by the saw. My one regret was what it would do to the kids, knowing what happened, even if they didn't see it. Blowing the dust clear from the opening, I worked on smoothing the butt of the gun to a pistol-like grip. Maybe it'd do them good. When they got a little older and heard why their teacher died, that she was a dirty backstabbing whore who got what she deserved, it'd keep them from doing the same. I ran my hand down the wood. Not perfect, but good enough. I spun the handle on the vise and lifted the gun free. It was lighter now, quicker, almost eager to be used. I put the butt down on the bench so it pointed up at the ceiling, and following the video I found online, unscrewed the cap of the magazine. The spring popped out into my hand, along with the plug, limiting the capacity to 3 rounds. I chucked it into the trash, pressing the spring back into place, and screwed the cap into position. 5 rounds. It wasn't many, and I didn't know how many people would be at the daycare. I needed to practice loading. Picking up the gun, I pressed the little button on the bottom of the finger guard and pumped the action back and forward. It gave a satisfying chunk, so I did it again a few more times before slipping the shells into the bottom of the gun and running them through the chamber over and over again. I practiced all night until the light outside the window over my workbench turned pale pink, until my hands moved on their own, until I was ready. By the time I wrapped the gun in a rag and tossed it onto the back seat of my car, everything about the shotgun felt natural, smooth. I shut the door on the car and went inside the house. Jess was in the kitchen, still in her robe. I watched her pour a pot of water in the coffee maker and etched the last moments we had together into my memory. I didn't know why. I didn't know what I expected. But there was no rage, no love, no regret, just emptiness. Without turning around, she asked, "What are you doing in the garage this early?" I had a few things I needed to do before I took off this morning. I walked up behind her, slipped my arms around her waist, and planted a soft kiss on her cheek. Our last kiss goodbye. The warmth of her skin against my lips made me wonder if Craig's lips had ever touched her there, if there was any part of her that was truly still and only mine. She twisted out of my arms, opened the cabinet door, and reached for a mug. "I'm meeting with a friend after work, so don't wait up." "Okay," I sighed, catching sight of her purse on the counter. "I'll just order a pizza and find something on Netflix or something." I turned around and leaned back against the sink to face her. "When will you be back?" "Late." She flopped the mug down beside me. I slid over to get out of her way, and that's when I see the pack of Trojans tucked in her purse beside her billfold. "Okay." I shrugged and pushed off the counter. "I have to get ready. Have a good day, sweetie." But if she heard me, she didn't answer. The only words I heard echoed as a faint whisper in the back of my mind. The beautiful river. I nosed into the factory parking lot at 7:45. The line of workers outside the door waiting to punch in, stretched halfway to the lot, made me laugh. "You thought you'd show up right in the middle of the morning rush, stupid?" But I couldn't be too hard on myself. I hadn't done this before, and one mistake wasn't the end of the world. I turned back out onto the street and headed out to grab a cup of coffee. It was just a matter of time. There was no hurry. In fact, there was no reason in the world not to sit down and have some pancakes while I waited. There was a diner at the next corner. I ordered my food, sat, and had just poured the syrup when a man in a tie-dyed t-shirt flopped down in the chair across from me. "Burnt forest," he said. My hand froze, syrup still dripping from the pitcher. "Excuse me?" He gave a nervous-sounding chuckle and leaned back in his chair. "That's what I'm getting off of you, man. Like some fire came through and burned you out." I dropped the pitcher on the table. I'd really rather be alone, if you don't mind. He leaned forward and folded hands on the table, just staring at me with those hazel eyes. No, you don't. But your chakras are so plugged up with sludge, you don't have a clue what you really want. Shoot, I'll bet you can't feel a damned thing. Chakras? A vein in my forehead twitched. That's just what I need right now, some freaky new age hippie throwback psychoanalyzing me. But I didn't need any drama, not now, so I swallowed and picked up my fork and knife. Please, just go away. I'll go, he said, his eyes boring into mine. But tell me one thing. Do you think it will make it any better? My hand froze with the fork halfway to the plate. Would what make what any better? Let it go, man. His forehead creased. Pain only brings more pain. You need to let her go and move on. Love is the answer. Love and forgiveness. For a second time, stopped. This was insane. He didn't know. He couldn't know. Sorry, man, I'm messing this up, huh? A slight smile pulled at the corner of his mouth. I only realized what I am a couple weeks ago. It's wild, and I don't have that much figured out yet. But you need help, and that's what I'm meant for, to help people. He reached out and touched my hand. His fingertips brushed against my skin, tingles prickled in my arm, and his eyes went wide. Oh, God! His mouth dropped open and he pulled away. God, I'm just a baby light worker. Not ready for this kind of fight. He rubbed his hand like it was in pain, but never took his eyes from mine. Not once. Look, evil is a living thing, like a parasite that infects everything. It uses people in pain to spread, and it wants you, man, but you have to master it. Don't do this. He reached out his hand again. Let me help you. He blinked, and whatever spell he had over me shattered. I jerked my hand away from him, threw my fork on my plate, and jumped up from the table. I didn't know what was happening, but I didn't need it. Any of it. Without another word, I dumped whatever cash I had in my wallet on the counter by the register and stormed out to my car. He followed me. I could hear him shouting at me all the way across the parking lot. I caught a glimpse of him in the mirror when I backed out. He stared at me for a minute and then glanced over at the factory. I tipped the mirror so I couldn't see him, jammed the shifter into drive, and peeled out of the lot. Whatever kind of crazy this guy was, I wanted no part of it. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I looked down at the clock on the radio. 8:15. I wasn't late enough. I should have circled the block a few times to kill time. But that guy... I needed to clear my head. Soon we'll reach the shining river, I sang, my fingertips drumming on the steering wheel in time with Dad's hymn. I pulled into the factory lot, parked in my usual spot, and shut off the engine. But I couldn't get the guy out of my head. His eyes. What he said about the darkness wanting me. I glanced over my shoulder, down the street at the diner's sign peeking up over the treetops, and shivered. I never should have gone there. I should have just parked and waited. Taking a deep breath to steady my hands, I climbed out of the car. It didn't matter. I was here now. My breathing slowed. Even if someone saw the gun, even if they called the police now, I'd have 10 minutes at least, probably closer to half an hour before they could get here. And it would take time for them to figure everything out, who was even responsible for Craig's murder. By that time, Jess and all her friends would be dead, and I'd be... Laughing, I shut the driver's door and opened the back. I never even thought about trying to get away. I had no idea what would happen after that. I took my jacket off the back seat, shoved my arms in the sleeves, and reached back in for the shotgun. It felt unnaturally cold in my hands. I pressed the button on the bottom of the finger guard and cracked open the action to double-check, but I loaded it last night. I didn't want to stand out here loading a gun. Too much time out in the open. Too many opportunities for things to go wrong. Footsteps slammed against the asphalt behind me, and I tucked the gun under my jacket. "Oh, thank you, God. I made it in time," a voice behind me panted. The guy from the diner. A high-pitched buzz rang in my ears, and I gripped the gun tighter. If I shot him now, Craig would hear. He'd run out or hide, and everything would be ruined. I didn't know what to do. "Look, I know it sucks," he said, still gasping from his sprint. "But you can get a divorce, get a new job, and start a new life. A happier life. I'll help carry some of that for you. Let me try, please." His hand pressed against my shoulder. I spun on my heel. The cut on my head burns, and the memory's gone, replaced by red and blue lights, the strange quiet murmur of people trying to talk without being heard, and the soft rustle of Alicia's scrubs as she works on my head. She pulls at the gauze taped to my cut, and I wince. Sucking a hissing breath through her teeth, she lifts a hand from my temple and whispers, "Sorry." She rips a bit of tape from the row of pieces she has stuck to the back of her glove and pushes it against my forehead. "Guess pain's a hero's reward, huh?" I bite my cheek to stem the pressure building behind my nose. Alicia's wrong. I don't dare say it. If I do, if I say anything, I won't be able to hold back the tears. But I'm no hero. I don't know what I am, but not a hero. A pair of black leather shoes appear alongside Alicia's white ones, and she steps back. I don't look up, not even when the officer clears his throat. "Mr. Wallace, I'm sorry. I know this isn't easy for you, but I need to take your statement. What happened?" I take a deep breath. "To be honest," a metallic clank cuts me off. I glance over at the other ambulance, at the body bag, as they load the gurney into the back. My shoulders slump. The truth is, but I can't tell him the truth, because I'm not even sure what happened. "Did you know him?" the detective asks, pointing the back of his pen at the gurney. I shake my head. "No, I only met him today. I didn't even know his name." "You did meet him before?" My chest aches. "Yeah." I pull my eyes from the ambulance and cover my mouth to fight against the sobs rising in my throat. "I just found out my wife was having an affair with my boss. My friend." My voice chokes out, and it takes a few moments before I can speak again. "I wasn't in a good place, so I stopped for breakfast to buy some time. "And that's where you met Jeff?" the detective finishes. I nod, but notice he called him by name. Jeff. Who was he? "Not really sure yet. Sort of a strange drifter. We have a few reports of him harassing people, telling them they needed help, but nothing violent. Not until today." My gut clenches. All he wanted to do was help. "Mr. Wallace?" the detective asks. I take a deep breath and raise my eyes to his neck. Not his eyes. I'll never look another person in the eye again. I know this isn't easy, but I need to know exactly what happened. Was it a heated exchange at the restaurant? No, but that's not true. Sort of. He said I needed help, and with the affair and all, I shouted at him to leave me alone and stormed out. And that's what triggered him. And after that, what happened when he confronted you here? When did you see the gun? I didn't. I watch his Adam's apple rise and fall as he swallows and scribbles in his notepad. It was 8:30. I got out of my car and... My voice trails away, and I have to shake my head to clear the memory. But my cheek still tingles where he touched me, where all my pain and rage flowed out of me and into him. like some crazy psychic transfusion, when his eyes turned from hazel to black and he started to sing, "Yes, we'll gather at the river that flows by the throne of God." My gaze drops to a yellowish stain on the detective's shirt, half hidden behind a dark blue tie. He'd never believe the truth. No one would. So I clear my throat and tell him the part he will believe. He appeared out of nowhere. I just reached in the back seat of my car, grabbed my jacket, slid it on, and there he was. He grabbed my shoulder and spun me around, and that's when I saw the shotgun. I tried to talk him down, but he just kept screaming about how everyone deserved to die. I nod over to Craig, who's still talking to a couple of uniforms. Craig must have seen us through the window. He came running out. The guy pointed the shotgun at him, and that's when I tackled him. I didn't want to hurt him. I just wanted to get the gun away from him. I swear, I never meant to. My voice cracks. But he just kept fighting. He wouldn't stop. That's when the gun went off. The detective stops writing. "Mr. Wallace, people think being a hero is a noble thing, but I've been involved in a few shootings and it never feels right. All you can do is console yourself with the knowledge that you did the right thing, that you saved lives. It helps." I know he means well, but his words taste bitter on my tongue. I swallow to clear the flavor and catch a glimpse of Craig pacing back and forth in front of the building, a cigarette still in each hand. But the rage, the hate, is gone. Empty. I turn my focus back to my hands. I don't know what Jeff did to me when he touched my face, but one thing I do know, I am not a hero.
Chilling tales for dark nights.